Hey, it is my pleasure to present to you all today. So thank you very much for joining today's webinar. So as we already said, the title of today's webinar is Achieving Better Business Outcomes with Process Mining and RPA. I think it should be a really exciting session for all of you. I think those are definitely two extremely hot topics right now, and I think having a great understanding of how you can use those two technologies together within the end, driving better business outcomes, you will walk away as a better business leader today. So let us dive into the agenda. So first of all, we want to quickly touch on why you should automate or process mine in the first place, right? And so this is going to be really essential because many times technologies are in the forefront, such as robotic process automation or process mining or AI. But I think it's important to really take a step back and say, why are we deploying these technologies? What is the end goal? What is the business outcome we're trying to improve, or how does it tie into our overall strategy as an organization? The second one is really keys to automation and success in transformation and how we go about that. We will also take a quick look at how Siemens was able to be very successful in their transformation, their automation initiative using process mining, and then really take a deeper look into how to use those two technologies alongside one another for really making intelligent decisions and automating your business in a scalable way. And then lastly, we will also look into a live demo of Celonis to show you how you can really use this in combination with the automation and transformation initiative. So I want to start by a quote from Gartner, which I will take a minute to quickly read out to you. Fragmented finance systems and processes mean that many organizations are highly inefficient and rely on manual processes and spreadsheets. This leads to added cost, processing errors, financial waste, heightened internal control risk, and the risk of misstating financial results. So some of you might now think, yes, great, that's a quote by Gartner, but that's kind of obvious. I think the point here really is that if you as an organization, right, are better, right, at tackling this challenge of having inefficient processes and fragmented systems, and are able to really deal with this challenge that many organizations are facing today, you're going to be in a better competitive position against your competitors, right? And at the same time, if you're just average or below average in terms of how you're dealing with this challenge as part of your transformation initiative, you're going to be at a disadvantage, right? So you can really derive operational competitive advantage from being absolutely outstanding and excellent in how you digitize and automate and tackle your processes, and all with a view to, in the end, obviously being able to have, for example, a better customer service, a better customer experience, lower operational costs, a higher on-time delivery rate when it comes to your customers, and so forth. So let's take a look at a couple of companies who are already extremely successful today because they're known for, because they've taken this part of their operations extremely serious, right? So Amazon, for example, or Netflix, right, as well as Palo Alto Networks, are known for using intelligence, automation, and really absolute operational focus on process performance to a maximum in order to really beat their competitors and be outstanding in the industries, right? And so if you look at the financial performance here as compared to the average of the NASDAQ, you can see that they've clearly outperformed some by a number, by 4 or 5x or even more, right? And so there might also be some players in the market that are below the NASDAQ, right, because they're really lagging behind. So in many cases here, it's not just a matter of being incrementally better than others, but really, are you going to be able to really be around in the future as a company, right? So this massive shift that we're seeing right now is really critical, and having focus on your internal processes and how these processes in the end drive your performance, whether it relates to how you're dealing with your customers and your suppliers and so forth, can be a huge factor. So if we look at what other people have said in the market, right? You can see here, for example, a report by EY that deals with automation, and here it says why planning makes the difference between success and disappointment, and which also talks about, right, the necessity to really look at your to do careful investigation and planning as part of a bigger automation initiative. Or, for example, Forrester, that has said that process mining is a compass for digital transformation and can really help you to be a guide in terms of how you go about your digital transformation and where you should, for example, focus initially and where you go next and so forth. So these are already obviously a lot of voices in the market, but let's see what that means really concretely when you look at a transformation initiative. So when we want to transform, in the end of the day, we are trying to make our business better, right, and achieve a better a better business outcome or business impact. And there's a typical cycle by which this how this works, right? So usually you want to start off by understanding the current state of your business and understanding where there's areas of improvement, right? Because if you have a big business, you need to understand where you should really focus your attention initially in order to get started. Then secondly, once you've identified an area of improvement, you want to really dive into this area and understand, what are the root causes for example, for sub-performance, right? Or for, what is currently holding us back, so that if we improve that, we would actually be better, or we could really transform, right? And so once you've understood your root causes, you really also want to go into a mode of selecting a solution, right? This could be training your employees. This could be deploying a new type of technology. This could be a number of things, right? And then you really want to go into the third point here around operationalizing that change, right? How can you make sure that you're actually changing something in the organization that's sustainable and means that going forward, you're actually going to walk out as an improved, business line or improved organization. And finally, you want to be able to measure, right, and sustain this, right? So you need to be able to, once you've deployed a change initiative, you want to be able to continuously measure and monitor that to make sure that this is really sustainable shift and change. So what does that really mean when you're looking at robotic process automation, for example? Right? So it's the exact same methodology. Firstly, you want to discover your automation potential, so understand where could you actually improve your business, right? Or where could you achieve better business outcomes if you automated certain steps in your process. Secondly, you want to really be able to prioritize automation tasks as you look to improve your business outcomes, right? So where would it make sense to first deploy automation? Where would I really have some quick wins, right? Because it's important to show quick wins internally as well to your management when you're rolling out an automation initiative, right? So there might be some lower hanging fruits that you could tackle first before really going to the very complex activities. Thirdly, you then want to implement those bots and trigger the activity, right? So there might be certain triggers that should kick off those bots. In other cases, you may be able to just schedule those. And then lastly, you want to be able to monitor that automation initiative and quantify the business outcomes, right? Quantify the impact that you had to the business. Because in the end, that's what the executives will care about. They won't care as much which technology you've used. They will mostly care, what have you improved in our underlying business, and what has that improvement been? And then if you then say that, you use X, Y, Z in technology, for example, process mining and RPA, and that's great, but primarily the underlying goal is really to improve the business outcome. So let's take a look at Siemens. Siemens, right, unlike the examples that we were looking at earlier with Amazon, Netflix, and so forth, right, is not a digital native, right? It has been around for a very long time and has still managed to stay extremely successful, very competitive in the marketplace, still a hugely successful company. And they've taken this internal journey of digital transformation and how they improve and automate their processes extremely seriously. So here we have T, who's the head of operational excellence and who led a big transformation project where he traveled to more than 40 countries, right, improving the order-to-cash process globally for Siemens. And he introduced a measure called the digital fit rate, which effectively measures the number of manual activities as part of the order-to-cash process, and has actually been able to introduce this as a KPI by which the managers and the CFOs, the regional CFOs across Siemens, are being measured. And this was a hugely successful initiative where they were able to eliminate 10 million manual activities, saving more than 15 million annually. And so his recommendation is that the automation rule number one is to really take a process-first approach, right? That RPA can deliver big savings, and that you should really assess that actual potential using process mining, right, just to validate if you can really achieve this potential. And in that case, RPA is a great companion to process mining in the desire to drive further automation, right? So he's really, in this quote, embodying or saying what we were pointing at earlier in our kind of transformation circular diagram, that you should obviously assess your process, understand the potential, right? Implement improvement measures, and as part of these improvement measures, right, automation, RPA, can be an extremely useful, right, tool in order to crystallize certain value extremely fast, right? And in that scenario, right, RPA can really be a great companion, right? And I think this, is shown tremendously by the success of where, in a short amount of time, they were able to really streamline this process and drive out a huge number of manual activities. So what does that really mean when we bring it together, right? In the end, we want to be able to have an operational model of using process mining together with robotic process automation that can really scale across the organization and that's really repeatable and covers all parts of the actual, the actual transformational automation cycle as we've been looking at it. So to summarize again, we want to be able to discover automation potential, prioritize those automation tasks based on the business outcome. We want to be able to implement those bots and trigger them ideally intelligently. And then we want to be able to monitor and quantify business outcomes, right? And if we bring this back, right, what does that really mean? We, in the end, will probably want to, for example, drive down the cost of PO, the cost per PO, for example, in a procurement process, or in our order-to-cash process. We want to streamline or shorten our lead time, right, or improve our on-time delivery rate. Or when we're talking about a support center or customer service center, we want to be able to streamline the time it takes, for example, to resolve a certain customer request, and making sure that we can respond to our customers quickly. And so, bearing in mind these underlying outcomes which we want to drive, we can then use process mining and robotic process automation in a really impactful way by applying this methodology. So let's look at what that means in practice. So first of all, discovering automation potential. Because you're able, with process mining, to get a detailed understanding and visualization of your process, you're able to assess the number of manual activities in your process and evaluate the current automation rates. Because you want to understand where are those areas or those manual areas which, if you automated them, would have a high potential impact, right? And there might be a particular activity. It takes 7 minutes, and if you automated that, this would have a certain impact. But there might be another activity that takes only 4 minutes. However, this may happen if we automated this activity, which takes only 4 minutes, we would actually achieve a much greater business outcome, right? And so that's why we cannot just take kind of qualitative approach, to automation, where we actually really have to look at what the data is telling us in terms of what the actual business outcomes would be, right? Back to T's points, kind of assess and validate the potential savings we could get from automating a certain task or activity as part of a process, to really kind of give us the confidence in kind of going forward with automating those activities, right? And so here you have an example of an invoicing process where you, for example, detected a manual activity which was actually entering those invoices into SAP, which happens hundreds of thousands of times a year, and you're able to, for example, very quickly pick out a certain customer or supplier for which you want to actually deploy a robot in order to help with this manual entering into SAP. Then the second one is actually intelligently triggering the bot execution. So Celonis has something called the action engine, which effectively constantly monitors your process and looks for certain things to happen in your process, right? So, for example, if it's monitoring your order to cash process, it will look for certain high value customers, and will go through all of your orders and detect whether some of these orders may be at risk, for example, for getting delivered on time. So if it detects that a certain order, for example, is at risk for making its confirmed delivery date, it will send a signal to the user notifying him or her of this risk, and then also allow the user to take action, right? And this action could either be the user performing a task manually, or the user could actually choose to also trigger a bot. So here we're really combining or kind of completing this vision of kind of injecting intelligence into automation, where we have a huge amount of data being run through Celonis, and the process being continuously monitored, and then basically triggering a bot to potentially help intervene in the process and making sure that this order, for example, is expedited and then successfully meet its confirmed delivery date. Then next, the delivery and the quantification of business outcomes. So that is always a really important step. Once you've started deploying the automation initiative, right, using, for example, robotic process automation, you want to be able to assess and monitor what the actual business outcome has been, right? And you can do this in several ways. So firstly, because Celonis has integrations with all the major RPA vendors. It means that we can actually understand the activities as part of the end-to-end process that are being performed by automation or RPA bots, as well as back-end automation. And so we're getting this constant stream of data from the actual source systems, as well as data from the actual bots that are performing activities to understand what the contribution of these bots is to the end-to-end business outcomes or to the end-to-end process. Right? And so that way you really get a data-driven ROI and also business understanding of what these bots are doing and what the actual outcomes are. And you're seeing all of that as part of the end-to-end process. Secondly, we also have a transformation center where you can measure your core KPIs as part of your end-to-end transformation and really understand and monitor how you've, for example, been able to drive up on-time delivery, right, or drive down throughput time or drive down cost per PO as part of this transformation initiative, and then also clearly indicate where you, for example, started your automation initiative in order to help achieve that. So how do we do all of that? This is all being done inside of Celonis Intelligent Business Cloud, which consists of several components. So first of all, you have to imagine that whenever you execute business activities as part of a process in your business, this is typically being captured by a number of different systems which your organization may be running today. For example, Oracle, SAP, Salesforce, ServiceNow, and so forth. And Celonis has event collection technology, which allows us to mine all of this data fully automatically from these systems, and then apply process mining technology to be able to perform a number of really high value visualization analytics. So we are able to discover the underlying business process. We're able to analyze those processes. We are able to operationalize some of these findings, right, as we pointed on using the action engine to be able to notify users and or trigger bots in order to intervene in the process and make them better. And then finally, using the transformation center to be able to sustain and monitor the overall progress as part of the transformation goals which we've set for ourselves. And then we have our Intelligent Business App Store, which we'll show as well as part of the demo, which we're about to go into, where you have more than 350 pre-built applications for different business applications or different use cases arranged by business area. So, for example, within order to cash or procurement or accounting, logistics, warehousing, production, so forth, you will find you'll find pre-built apps that you can deploy very quickly, and which will help you get insights into your processes and see them in a way that our existing customers have viewed them to get value extremely quickly. So we will now jump into a demo.
While the demo is coming up on everyone's screen, I just wanted to remind you all that you have widget-driven type of screen view. So you're going to see if your live view doesn't open as quickly as your media player, you can minimize it, make it live again. Also, just use the refresh button on your web browser if while the demo is coming up, it happens to lock up for you. So just wanted to make sure that everyone is aware of that to help navigate your widgets while the demo is opening up for you. And if you have any technical issues, if you see it freezing up and you're not seeing the screen that we're talking about, please put a note in the Q&A and Ashley will help you.
Perfect. So I hope everyone can see the demo now. this is inside of the Celonis application where where we're looking at some anonymized customer data here in a purchase to pay process that had a net order value of $2 billion, a cost per PO where we can see around $10 throughput time of a month, and we are kind of looking at our initial kind of overview of this process in terms of how it actually looks and how automated it is, both looking at the manual activities, back-end automation, so how much of this is actually the automation is done by, for example, APIs, and then also how much is already done, for example, using robotic process automation. But before we dive deeper into it, I just want to quickly show you, give you a quick introduction to process mining and how this actually looks from a process discovery standpoint. So here we have the actual purchase-to-pay process fully automatically visualized and reconstructed from the underlying data from the source systems. And, we can see that in around 40% of all the cases, this is the process that we're seeing. So we always start by looking at the most frequent way that the process actually unfolds. And we can see that this happens with the creation of the purchase requisition item first, then you create the PO item, you send the PO, receive the goods, scan the invoice, and then book the invoice. And what we can do now is actually step-by-step uncover the actual underlying process, right? So we can see that, for example, in 150,000 cases, you're skipping the purchase requisition and creating purchase order items right away, or here in 145,000 cases, you see that you're changing the price before receiving the goods. And so we can also look at, for example, what that means from a throughput time perspective, right? So you see here that rather than taking 8 days, you're actually taking 17 days whenever that happens. And in that same way, for example, we could also look at the actual overall automation rate, right? So seeing that, here, even though sending the PO is already automated with 61%, if you change the price, it's actually a pretty manual activity when it drops down to 15%. And you can further uncover this process step by step, seeing other types of deviations in the process. For example, that in some cases you're scanning the invoice before you're actually creating the purchase order item, which typically is a sign of kind of maverick buying and in compliance. And then finally, you can actually expand this process all the way to get full transparency of your entire process and all the 655 different variants of how goods are being procured in this organization. So if you go back to our initial view, we can now see that if we for example, look at this process here, not only from an overall automation rate, but we could, for example, also look at the actual bot rate, right? And we see, for example, here that book invoices is we've already been very successful, or we've already deployed quite a number of bots here to achieve 41% book invoice automation. But then, for example, here, when we look at received goods, that's actually at 0%, so there might be some opportunity there. And in order to assess this opportunity, what we would typically do is we actually look at or compare the actual automation rate, or in this case, we're looking at the manual rate, and compare it with the actual frequency of the underlying activities, right? Because when we automate something, we want to automate something that happens very frequently in the hope that we would achieve, obviously, a bigger payback than if we would just automate an activity which either is already very automated or happens much less frequently. And so if you actually plot this, you can then again see that receiving goods is something that happens very frequently, more than 700,000 times, and is actually a very manual activity, right? So the manual rate is 73%. So if we then look at this activity here in our table, we can actually see that there's already 20% automation through backend automation. However, there's 0% automation happening through robotic process automation, for example, Whereas if you compare this to other activities like for example, the deletion of the purchase order, where 50% of the cases are already being automated using RPA, or booking the invoice, and that's obviously very low. It's 0%. And so what we would like to do is actually investigate this further and take a look at this receive goods step or activity as part of our process. So what we do is we go here in this particular view here, where we can actually go further and drill down further into this particular step. So rather than, for example, trying to automate this particular activity across the entire organization, which may be a really time-intensive, and hugely complex undertaking, we could maybe see if there's a way to focus this initiative a little bit more in order to, for example, achieve 80% of the value that we would get from actually taking all the activities, all of the processes across the entire entire organization. So what we can see is that we can actually look at a number of different metrics here, right, by which we can analyze this process. So, for example, what we see here is we can look at the different company codes that are available, and I can see that actually the majority of the value, so we can also see the estimated savings that we would get from automating these particular steps here in the receive goods activity, is actually centered around a couple of purchasing organizations or company codes. So I can actually select these. And then lock in that selection. You can also see with the filters at the top here that this has actually kind of applied a filter across our entire analysis. And then we can even go one step further in saying, let's take a look at which materials are actually being affected by this, right? Or let's say rather the material groups. And again, we can see that we don't necessarily have to apply this automation across all our material groups, which, yes, we could absolutely do. But maybe in the first step, it would make most sense to focus or hone in on these three material groups here, bulbs, monitors, and metal processing, to achieve the biggest initial impact. So again, we could, basically highlight this. And then what's also important is that if you actually look at the different variants, right, or different sequence of how this process unfolds, we see that it's not necessarily only in kind of the standard or the most frequent flow where purchase orders, are being sent and then the goods are received, but also in some of these other very frequent variations where we're, for example, changing the price, or after we've changed the price or after we've received an order confirmation, right? So you could, for example, also hone in on these particular variants of the process. So now I see, right, looking at the actual business impact, right? So far we've realized, no savings with RPA, which makes sense because the bot rate is 0%. But it's giving me a pretty concrete answer around how much, money could be saved from the actual data if I were to automate, these material groups for these particular company codes, right? So I have a very concrete opportunity in front of me that I can really ring fence and define, and that I can action on. So, for the purpose of this demo, let's just assume that we would now go and deploy RPA bots on this particular activity here of receiving goods for our defined scope, and we will now look at the actual the actual process and what business outcomes we were able to achieve. So we can now see, for example, here at the top, right, our cost per purchase orders and the bot rate over time, and here our cost per PO and our overall automation rate. So that means back-end automation and RPA automation. And so we can see that basically, we slowly launched into this automation initiative where we identified, right, initially we identified our opportunity and then started deploying RPA bots, right? And if we then look at the actual, outcome, we can compare our business process side by side. We can see the average cost per PO of $11.26 and 30 days of cycle time, and then if you compare that to the average cost per PO and our cycle time after the automation initiative, we can see that we were able to make a significant improvement, both in terms of timing, but also especially in terms of the cost per PO. And this is something that we can, then basically, build on the success to go back to a process and find even more automation opportunities to drive an even greater business improvement. And the other aspect I just wanted to briefly show you is also our App Store. So here, this is our massive library of business transformation apps where you can go and select different source systems, and then for those source systems, you have a big selection of different business and process areas where you can then just click on a particular app that you're interested in, and then install that app, and you're ready to go. So let's go back to the presentation.
All right, everyone, as your screen is finishing up there on the media player, just a quick reminder, just push the widget that shows the little, looks like a presentation chart, and that will bring back up your presentation. If you get hung up for some reason, just hit refresh on your browser, and it will automatically bring the presentation back up. And Mark, we're back over to you now.
Great, thank you very much. So in the end of the day, what we're trying to achieve by using Celonis and RPA is really remove friction across the enterprise, right? Remove friction from your underlying business processes, where you can really go from, opportunity or area of opportunity identification to, triggering action all the way through automation and doing that in an intelligent way. And, here are just some examples of different areas in the organization where you could apply this tool, right? So you could, think about product development, right? Reducing your time to market, and, reducing duplicate engineering, and lead to order or reorder, right? Reducing your sales cycles, increasing your conversion rates, order to cash, where you might be looking at optimizing working capital or increasing your on-time delivery, and customer service right here is also a great example. That will be is really one of the most critical areas for your organization. In recent times has become even more critical as part of the new customer focus that companies are taking in their digital transformations, and all the way to how you procure your internal services such as IT service management, or even your financial closing as part of your accounting organization, right? So this really gives you end-to-end coverage. You can apply this anywhere in the organization, anywhere where you have also systems supporting your underlying business processes, and so there's really no limit in terms of where you can apply this. So finally, we want to drive success with automation and process mining, so we want to demonstrate immediate ROI. So start with the process, prioritize your automation tasks based on business outcomes, right? So some companies have taken kind of a phased approach when they looked at automation, where they went through, or robotic process automation, where they went through an initial pilot, where they selected a couple of processes in a kind of opportunistic fashion where they knew, they're very manual, they're a potential pain point, and this could be something where we could test RPA as a technology to see whether it works and whether we could get some improvements, right? However, when you really want to scale across the organization and make automation a part of your overall transformation strategy, you need to be able to look at your processes and assess and monitor those processes, across the enterprise, across divisions, and look at them from a global perspective. And you can't really rely on a kind of opportunistic and qualitative model where you're just asking people in the business to kind of flag areas of potential automation, right? So then you want to actually optimize, right, secondly, those process outcomes. So, for example, by linking and making use of the integration that we've built with RPA and Action Engine to actually being able to intelligently trigger bots as well over time, right? So not only looking at kind of simple RPA where you're running scheduled jobs overnight, but you can actually intelligently trigger bots. And then finally, really accelerating this entire initiative, right, by being able to identify those automation opportunities quickly, and also demonstrating business impact over time to really become a leader and transform your digital operations. So if you want to know a little bit more about Celonis, right? So we are one of the leading and most fastest growing software companies in the world. We have more than 600 enterprise customers. We're working from very large organizations such as Siemens, Bosch, 3M, for example, all the way to also very large digital natives such as Uber, right? But also with smaller companies such as Schukat, which is a wholesale distributor with a couple of hundred employees in Germany that has really put process mining and Celonis at its core. We've also been named as the clear market leader by Gartner. And if you want to know more, come visit us on our website, and feel free to reach out to us. So this is it from my side. I think we can now take a couple of questions. So I'll hand it back over to you, Ursula.
Okay, and we do have a number of questions, so thank you for sending them in. Let's start with the first question, and this comes from Joe. How would you explain the benefits and impact on business outcomes using RPA to a client that is adverse to change?
That's a great question. And I think that if you are adverse to change, right, then that typically there can obviously be a number of factors, like, right? Obviously, there will typically be some people in the organization that are adverse to change, and there might be others in the organization that are excited about change, right? Typically, when you look at companies that have been adverse to change, right, in recent history, haven't necessarily done the best. But I think that oftentimes when it comes to change, it's kind of in our human nature that we're kind of adverse, because it's change means kind of stepping into something unknown, right? And oftentimes, right, business transformation is kind of driven from the executives, right? But being able to really, bring and translate what that transformation means down to the individual employees, right, is often a big challenge, right? So I think, when it comes down to explaining what process mining is and RPA, I think the important part is to also focus on what does it actually mean for that person, right? It doesn't, change doesn't have to be a bad thing, right? Change can also mean, for example, spending less time on really kind of, frequent and annoying and kind of low-value activities, right? So freeing them up actually to be more creative or to have more time for things that they actually enjoy doing, right? So at the end of the day, right, we have to translate what change means for them and also highlight the positive aspects, right? So change doesn't necessarily have to be negative.
All right, good examples there. Andre has a question. Are your RPA bots manipulating EDI transactions before they make it to the ERP, or does that occur afterwards?
So, I mean, I can't, because Celonis doesn't offer RPA. We're simply partnered with the leading vendors in RPA. So, for example, Automation Anywhere, UiPath, and Blue Prism are kind of the leading partners of ours here, and also the kind of the leading vendors in the space. So, RPA bots, right? They typically interact in the user interface, right? So they actually mimic certain clicks that a user would typically take or do, and then basically just and you have the ability to inject rules into that, and then to basically automate a process by mimicking what the user would typically do, right? So you're not actually manipulating kind of the EDIs or kind of integrations that you might have with certain suppliers in the back end, but rather you're just working with what's given in the user interface and kind of mimicking or reproducing the work that an employee would typically do.
All right, thank you so much for that. Another question that comes up, this relates, and we've had the question in several sessions about data and people having data in order. In this case, part of the data is your processes. So as it's flowing through, do you find that if people don't know where all their processes sit, or the data that needs to be pulled from those processes to continue on from an automation perspective, can you make any inference into how much people need to, how much that's a barrier, or if in fact how they should plan for that as they're starting to set up the system? Could you make some comment on that?
So if I understand the question correctly, it's around kind of data quality, and I think that typically cleaning up your data and your master data is kind of a hugely important step, right? So I think that even if you look at Siemens and T, when he went about his order to cash transformation, a lot of the kind of automation he was able to drive, a lot of that was actually cleaning up the master data. So I think that even though it might be sometimes tempting, right, to kind of use automation as a quick fix, right, you actually almost always you have to go and do the hard work as well, and do the homework around kind of cleaning up your data, and also really improving and standardizing the underlying business processes before just going and applying kind of blindly applying automation, right? Like there's a famous quote by Bill Gates as well, where he kind of said that applying automation to an efficient process would actually magnify that efficiency. But but vice versa, if you apply automation to a bad process, you're just magnifying the inefficiency.
All right, thank you so much. And I think we're getting close on time, so I think we'll just take this as the very last question here. There's a question related to the pre-built apps. So you went through the App Store a little bit, and the question that Andre's asking is, do you have pre-built apps for infrastructure? So ones that if they're using this operating system or the CRP or that type of thing, is that something that's built into the apps?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I perhaps wasn't able to show it in kind of all the length earlier, but our apps are actually clustered in two ways. They're clustered by operating systems, so we have apps for over 70 different systems, right? So a lot of the very common systems, and they're clustered by kind of line of business, right? So line of business and also the system, right? Because typically, different systems have different, data structure, and they have different, standard steps and so forth. So we definitely have different apps for different systems. And again, they're all out of the box. If you have, for example, a legacy system, right? So also in the case of Siemens, right, which isn't a digital native, they had to go through a lot of hard work, but they had, 70 SAP systems as well as 30 kind of custom or legacy systems, right? And so they implemented Celonis across all of them. And in many cases where, for example, that was a legacy system that we, or there a system that, Celonis was unfamiliar with, or where that, they didn't already have, or we didn't already have kind of out of the box apps that they could leverage, you would then actually have to go and with obviously with help from us or our partners, then, develop those connectors and kind of build those applications for your specific systems that you're interested in, right? And in many cases, you also have processes which obviously run across different systems, right? So they may start in one system, which we already have a connector for and apps, and then end in another system. So then you actually have in a legacy system, for example. So then you actually have to connect kind of these different data sources all into a common kind of Celonis data model and Celonis app to get that end-to-end visualization and insight.
All right. Well, thank you. And Rhonda was making a lot of comments as you were going along about ticketing systems, networking, that kind of thing. So you were obviously pointing it all out correctly. So that was great. So Mark, that was tremendous. Thank you so much for all of the background and information. I hope for all of you that not only did the Siemens use case help to kind of solidify it, bring it into practical application, but I know for me as a green belt, I always love seeing it actually go through the screens, walking it through the way that you did and helping us understand exactly what it looks like visually. I think that's one of the key differences with using process mining tools is that I call it, we used to have to spend weeks interviewing people and walking the process and having stick-it notes all over the wall, and now you can hook it up to all the different systems and see that visually in a matter of just a very short amount of time. So thanks, Mark, for that. That was really useful. And I just wanted to remind everybody, and be sure to take those gift bag items that are in your resource list with you. That will give a couple more additional resources for you with the white paper and information to use and reference. Tomorrow, if you'd like to replay this, because I know there's a lot of information in here and walking through the overview, another time is probably quite useful. Tomorrow, about the same time, you'll receive an email that has a link to this recording. If you didn't get a chance to download the giveaways, you'll be able to do it then. And then I just wanted to also let everyone know we have 2 more sessions today. It's a very action-packed kickoff day, so we are starting in less than 5 minutes now for the next session, which is taking business system transformation to the piggy bank, where we're going to hear from McGraw-Hill Education Group about a significant transformation on the process and technology side. And then we're going to wrap up today with intelligent automation, specifically in shared services, at 3 o'clock. So we'll see you all back in 5 minutes. Thanks to everyone who joined live. Special thanks to those of you who are listening to the recording. And on that note, this now concludes this webinar session.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.